Welcome, folks, to today's episode. It's called Fast Fashion, Faster Fall, the Forever 21 Flameout. And I love this story because, in many ways, it is the story of the American dream. Like, it begins in a tiny Los Angeles storefront, started up by a Korean immigrant couple, and within a decade, they've created this fast fashion empire. But there are scandals, there's the sweatshops, there's copyright infringement, there's religion, there's this relentless refusal to slow down or to take even any outside advice. It leads to 2 bankruptcies. It's the story of how Forever 21 went from kind of defining a generation to become a case study in self-destruction. And it was self-destruction because you gotta praise the Changs, who we'll get into, for creating this massive empire, but they also have to take the blame for its implosion, and it's a fascinating story. Before we dig into it, a quick reminder. While these shorter weekly episodes, released every Wednesday, are free for everyone, for just $1.99 a month, you get access to our co-hosted hour-long episodes released on the first of every month, where Keith and I do an even deeper dive into an incredible business story. Some of the older hour-long episodes are still free, so you can get a taste of what to expect, as well as getting access to these monthly co-hosted hour-long episodes. Some of them are a bit over an hour. Behind the paywall right now is a fantastic 3-part series on Disney. And over the coming months, we'll be adding more bonus content for subscribers regularly. Also, subscribers will get access to these weekly episodes ad-free, so you won't have to listen to me go on about our subscriber program. It's great value for just $1.99 a month. You can subscribe via Apple subscriptions, Spotify subscriptions, or on Patreon using the link below, or go to patreon.com/Great Business Stories. Do Wong Chang and his wife Jin Suk, they were Korean immigrants. They had barely any English, and in the early 80s, Do Won, he worked 3 jobs. He worked as a janitor, a gas station attendant, and in a coffee shop, while his wife, Jin Suk, worked as a hairdresser. Now, how they got into this business will depend on whose version you believe. Do Won said that he noticed something in the early years when he was working in the garage. He said that men driving luxury cars often worked in the garment trade. So that's what he noticed, and that insight became his inspiration for getting into the clothes business. Jin Suk, his wife, she tells a slightly different story. She is quoted as recalling that soon after arriving in America, she went to the top of a mountain to pray, and God told her she should open a store. Now, the Changs were devout, born-again Christians, and that features in the story. But either way, anyway, they saved their money. They saved $11,000, and in April 1984, they opened up a small 900 square foot clothing shop in Highland Park, Los Angeles, and they called it Fashion 21. By the end of the first year, they had grossed over $700,000 in sales. I mean, that's a pretty astonishing figure for a first-time business run by 2 people who had no experience in the business, and also operating like in the cutthroat retail sector. But they had a very simple and very direct vision. They were going to provide fast and affordable street fashion for working class youth who couldn't afford luxury brands. And it wasn't long before the Changs, they rebranded the name to Forever 21. Do Won was the CEO. Jin Suk, she was in charge of merchandising. Now, at first they bought discounted wholesale stock from the Los Angeles garment district, but before long they started contracting local manufacturers to produce their own designs. Now, I'll put, quotation marks over their own designs, as we'll get into as the story continues, but based on emerging trends. And remarkably, about 60% of their production remained in the US and did so throughout the reign of Forever 21. But that gave them the advantage of proximity and speed, because their model was built on volume and velocity. Forever 21 would identify a popular style, recreate it cheaply, and again, recreate might be a nice way of putting this, because, as we shall see later, they got into huge legal trouble with loads of designers over copyright infringement. But they'd have it in the store within weeks, and as a result, customers kept on coming back, knowing the shelves were constantly, replenished. And it was this fast turn inventory system. It became the backbone of Forever 21's success. Now, with the profits from their first store, the Changs, obviously hugely ambitious, they launched an aggressive expansion strategy in the late 80s. By 1989, they had 11 stores, including their first in a traditional shopping mall. And shopping malls became their MO in terms of their destination. Many of their early stores came in around 5,000 square feet, so they were getting bigger. And the formula was pretty simple. Set up a shop in a high-traffic shopping mall, often taking over units that were vacated by retailers who had to close down, and invest early profits in the new locations. The Changs started opening up roughly one store every 6 months, and by the year 2000, they'd opened nearly 100 stores nationwide, some now as large as 10,000 square feet. And it was becoming a kind of a staple of American malls. Now, while their rapid growth was getting hard to miss, they were becoming more visible, so too were the questions it raised about labour practices, because during the 90s the company relied heavily on the Los Angeles garment sector, and this was a sector that was known for sweatshop labour, and the decision to keep manufacturing close to headquarters, while it did allow the Changs to cut production time, it also exposed them to the murky subcontracting labour practices that were happening around the world, but for them to be happening in America, of course, was far more visible and far more close to home. And by the late 90s, workers producing clothes for Forever 21, they came forward with stories of 12-hour days, unsafe working conditions, and pay that was well below the minimum wage. And this issue erupted into a full-blown controversy in 2001 when 19 garment workers, they sued Forever 21 directly over alleged sweatshop conditions in these LA factories. Now, the battle escalated, there was a national boycott, protesters picketed stores, and it dragged on for 3 years until 2004, when there was a confidential settlement ended the boycott. And as a result of this settlement, Forever 21 pledged, and I quote, to ensure clothes it sells are made under lawful conditions, close quote. Now, stick a pin in that, because as we shall see throughout Forever 21's 20-30 years, they continue to get in trouble over their association with these LA garment factories and the very, very poor labour conditions that went on in there. Now, ironically, given their apparent disregard for really bad labour conditions, Forever 21 was guided by the founders' Christian faith. We mentioned it earlier. The couple attended church every morning at 5 a.m. They saw the company's success as being divinely guided, to the extent that they even had John 3:16 from the Bible printed on the bottom of all of their yellow shopping bags. Now, the Changs didn't overtly market Forever 21 as a Christian brand. As their daughter Linda Chang said, the faith of the founders is separate to the brand. The bag is simply a statement of faith. And look, I'm not a believer, but I do get it. If they wanted to put a few lines from the Bible on the bottom of their bags, let them at it. And it also has to be pointed out that the Changs, through their Chang 21 Foundation, they gave very, very generously to charities, to churches, to lots of places, and especially in third world countries. And unlike an awful lot of very rich people who just give money to charity, they went really above and beyond that. It was much more than just doling out money. For example, instead of going off on luxurious vacations, they visited many of the charities in far off and often very dangerous locations. And even when they became billionaires, Duan would still sometimes take the bus to work. In their personal demeanour, Duan was described as being gentle, upbeat, earnest, always had a ready smile. He had a good sense of humour. Jin Suk was described as being a bit more reserved. She could sometimes come across as being stern, but while they did work the people in their offices extremely hard, they were also known to be very kind in very small ways, like remembering people's birthdays, paying for an employee's mother's funeral quietly. By all accounts, from the people who knew them and worked closely with them, the Changs, they come across as humble and overall pretty good people. So I'm not sure how their faith fits in with their disregard for how people in the garment factories were treated, and also to a lesser extent to the copyright infringements that we'll get into later, because that really was theft in a way. Perhaps the Changs reconciled it internally, viewing their personal actions like charity, their missions, their visits to third world countries. Maybe they viewed that as their service to God, while regarding business as a competitive domain governed by its own harsh rules. I don't know, but it's a strange contradiction. One very notable aspect of the Changs is what friends and employees describe as an almost like superhuman work ethic. Both Do-won and Jin-suk would be the first to arrive at the office. They'd be the last to leave. They were the living embodiment of this Korean concept, and I know I'm not going to pronounce this right, but it's called pali pali. It means hurry, hurry. And it kind of denotes speed, efficiency, this tireless drive. And it was this that helped them to grow Forever 21 at a breakneck speed. But of course, it's also what would lead the company into trouble as it grew too big, too fast, without any real structure. By 2001, Forever 21 had outgrown its teen mall boutique image. They started opening up larger, sprawling stores, and they moved into Chicago, Miami, Toronto, and inside you had these boutique-style departments for men, for women, plus-size, cosmetics, all under the one roof. Kind of like a department store. And there was plenty of opportunity back then, because you had retailers like Gadzooks, Rampage, Mervyn's. I've never heard of these, so these must be just American only. They went under, and Forever 21 would swoop in, buying the store leases, and each space now averaging 80,000 square feet. So you can see the growth of the stores. Nowhere was this strategy more visible, I suppose, than in Times Square, when in June 2010 they opened up a 91,000 square foot mega store in the old Virgin Megastore building. It had 4 floors, it had LED screens. As one executive put it, it was an experience, not just a store. And this growth is reflected in the revenue. If you look at 2005, they had revenue of $640 million. By 2007, that had grown to $1.3 billion. And even during the 2008 financial crisis, Forever 21's business model, frequent turnover, low cost, minimal advertising, that worked really well for them, because as recession hit, like frugality became fashionable, cheap was in, and by the end of the decade, 2010, the brand, it had effectively defined American fast fashion. Like for teens and 20-somethings, it became the default retail store. It was generating close to $2 billion in annual revenue. Store count now had passed over 500. Its footprint, it stretched all across America. It was now in Dubai as well, Canada, the UK, Ireland, and all of it remained under family control. CFO Larry Mayer, one of the few outsiders, he said they would IPO when the timing is right, but it never seemed to be right. The Changs preferred to keep control. Do-won and Jin-suk were still calling every major shot. The founders' daughters were increasingly visible. Linda Chang, in her mid-20s, took over marketing in 2008. Their second daughter, Esther Chang, she handled visual merchandising. Like, internal governance was informal. Decisions were made quickly. There was no board in any conventional sense. As CFO Larry Mayer said when describing a typical week under the Changs, he said, "We never know where we're going to be." And it all sounds a bit chaotic and unstructured, which it was, and it was in stark contrast to their main competitors, the likes of H&M and Zara. Like, they were opening stores as well, but they were opening them in select metros and with far more planning in place. Whereas with Forever 21, It had to be in every mall, in every suburb, every mid-tier city. I mean, this gave it reach, but this scattergun, frenzied approach, as we mentioned before, it would come back to bite them. And the Changs now, with a lot of confidence in their strategy and I'm guessing in their abilities, they set really ambitious targets. They wanted to have 8 billion in revenue by 2017, and by 2018 Forever 21 had ballooned into more than 800 stores in 57 countries and employed 43,000 people. But it didn't fuel growth revenue-wise. The added square footage ended up exposing deep weaknesses, and the stores started losing money. And the reason why? Because they simply hadn't put the structures and the processes in place to accommodate this massive growth. Like, stock rooms overflowed. Staff had to use dressing rooms for storage. Merchandise sat unsold as shipments just kept arriving. So the speed that had once powered Forever 21's turnover, it was now clogging up its own system. And management simply didn't have the expertise within their very small circle to oversee and manage this growth. The Changs, they remained too insular. Now, executives were hired from the outside, but they found that their ideas were sidelined. As one of them said, the family ignored our recommendations. And when the business began showing signs of strain, the instinct was just simply to circle the wagons. It wasn't to rethink the strategy. Now, together with all this chaos, then you had lawsuits which had dogged the company for years. The brand had always walked this very fine line between trend replication and outright copying. And from 2011 through to 2018, that line, it more or less disappeared because fashion designers, large and small, they accused Forever 21 of simply lifting their work wholesale. You had designers like Diane von Furstenberg, you'd Gwen Stefani, you'd Adidas, you'd H&M, and many more large and small brands and retailers. They sued, often, repeatedly. Now, the lawsuits didn't slow down production, but they painted a picture of a company that was profiting on blurred lines and legal settlements rather than original design. And despite their earlier run-in over labour issues, it appears that they didn't learn their lesson. Labour disputes piled up throughout the decade. And look, while it could be argued that technically Forever 21 didn't directly employ the people in these garment factories, research shows that Jin Suk personally visited the factories where their clothes were being made. And when you're signing checks, even indirectly, you just can't turn a blind eye to what's happening on the factory floor. I mean, it was wrong, and it's definitely a black mark against them. So you have their legal cases, and you have definitely their unstructured, frenzied approach was their biggest problem. But probably their second biggest issue or misstep was digital. Like, while the rest of the fashion industry, especially their competitors, were pouring money into e-commerce and into mobile strategy, Forever 21 was just focused on growing their physical footprint. Like, by 2018, only 16% of their sales came from online. They had no substantial influencer partnerships. They had no major social media traction. They had no what industry insiders call omni-channel integration to speak of. And at the same time, you had digital first competitors like Boohoo. They began eating into Forever 21's market. And on the ground, the operational issues that we talked about, they were being noticed by customers. Stores grew cluttered. The once exciting product rotation, it became repetitive and stale. Shoppers who had once treated Forever 21 as kind of this treasure hunt, they were excited to go in, but now they found it just exhausting. And complaints mounted as well about the quality, about the fit, and there was a sense that Forever 21 was increasingly off-trend. Teens started looking elsewhere. There was a quiet but unmistakable slide into irrelevance And that must be the dreaded word in fashion. Once you're seen by your most loyal customers as no longer being relevant, I mean, it's almost impossible to come back from that. And so it was for Forever 21. Sales, after peaking at 4.4 billion in 2015, they declined to 3.3 billion by 2018. And remember, this is at a stage where they had over 800 stores now, and many of their overseas flagship stores were hemorrhaging cash. Its stores in Canada, Europe and Asia, they were losing an average of $10 million per month. Inevitably, in September 2019, Forever 21 filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The company owed $347 million to its vendors. It secured $275 million in debt financing and an additional $75 million from new backers to stay afloat during these proceedings. But time was tight. The company had just 120 days to make decisions on hundreds and hundreds of leases. First thing they did was they cut the footprint aggressively. They exited Canada entirely, closing 44 stores. They pulled out of Europe, most of Asia. The first round of closures totaled around 200 stores globally. Negotiations with landlords were pretty tense because 4 property owners held nearly half of the company's leases. The biggest landlord, they tried to negotiate an equity stake in exchange for rent relief, but talks fell apart because behind the scenes, the Chang family, they were still in control. They refused to dilute their ownership. So that's a real thing that comes across in this whole story. The Changs wanted to cling on and were very, very so insular and so protective. But their hand was forced, and in February 2020, the court approved the sale of Forever 21 to a consortium led by Authentic Brands Group, or ABG, and this consortium also included some of their biggest landlords. And the $81 million bid that they put on the table, which, remember, that was less than a week's worth of peak sales during Forever 21's heyday, that was the only offer on the table. So effectively, the Changs, who owned all of Forever 21, they saw their net worth drop from its 2015 peak of 5.9 billion to now just 81 million. And based on the research I've done, given that they'd never gotten any outside investment and continually used the proceeds from Forever 21 to fund their expansion over the years, I didn't come across anything that suggested the Changs took huge amounts of money out of the company over the years. So I'm guessing their net worth at the end of all this was around $80 million. Maybe a little bit more, but not much more. Now, the new plan by the new owners, it was rebrand and modernise, streamline stores, lean into digital, license international operations instead of running them directly. They hired a new CEO, a former executive from H&M, and he talked about loyalty programs, experiential retail, pop-ups, all that. And then the pandemic hit. COVID-19 hit just weeks after the sale had closed, and any momentum they had was just crushed as a result of the lockdown. Forever 21, like all of retail, it just went into survival mode. It closed more stores. In 2021, sales rebounded slightly, reaching about 2 billion, but the business was fundamentally much, much weaker. Online competitors also had surged during the pandemic, while Forever 21, it remained reliant on physical locations. In 2023, they struck a partnership with Shein, the very company that had outpaced and outpriced them, and Shein branded pop-ups were launched in Forever 21 stores, but Forever 21 sales from the Shein app, they were very disappointing. And by 2024, Forever 21 was again hemorrhaging cash, and in January 2025, the brand's US operating arm was $1.58 billion in debt. So inevitably, on March 16th, 2025, Forever 21 filed for Chapter 11 for the second time. Now look, it may still live on as a licensed brand. Its name might be slapped on products in foreign franchises or sold online through partners, but the vision of Forever 21 as this shopping mall giant, as this teenage rite of passage, a cultural touchstone, that's over. And in fairness, it had been over for many years. In a lot of the research on the collapse of Forever 21, I read experts, they pointed out to their environmentally damaging, unsustainable fast fashion model. They also pointed out to the lawsuits related to labour conditions and copyright infringements or outright theft as other reasons as to why people turned away from the company. But this doesn't hold much water. Like when you look at the continued growth of retailers like Shein and Temu, both of who have had and continue to have the exact same controversies and yet are flourishing. Forever 21, it collapsed as a result of its, I suppose you'd call it, unstructured, breakneck growth, hampered of course by owners who were unwilling to cede any control or listen to outside or sound advice. And what this story also shows is how people can so easily compartmentalize ethics. And I'm just not referring to the Changs here. I'm talking about most of us. Like, as mentioned, the growth of Shein and Temu and lots of other online retailers, including Amazon, they demonstrate how lots of consumers either choose not to think about where their goods come from, or just don't care, or a bit of both. And I gotta admit that I fall into that category. Now, my socially aware teenage daughter is putting pressure on me, and rightly so, because I think we need to think about these things. Anyway, I get off my hypocritical moral high horse now. What I love about Forever 21 though is that it's the story of immigrant grit. The very thing really that has made America this melting pot that allows ideas and businesses to flourish. And look, while there was no fairy tale ending, it's still a great, great business story. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And remember, if you have any comments, any corrections, or any story that you'd like us to cover, email us at info@gbspod.com. All the best, folks.